The night was eerily quiet as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of those who dared to linger in the darkness. Sarah sat motionless in the living room, staring at the mirror. It was the only thing in the room that remained untouched, its surface gleaming with an unsettling reflection. The world outside was still, but inside the house something pulsed with an energy that couldn't be ignored. James had gone out to get some food, but Sarah hadn't moved an inch since he left. The whispers had started again. At first it was faint, like a breeze rustling dry leaves in the distance. But now it was as though the very walls were speaking to her, their voices low and haunting, urging her to listen. Her fingers twitched at the thought of touching the mirror. The glass seemed to pulse with an invisible energy, pulling her in, beckoning her to come closer. She had heard the stories before. The house, the mirror, the whispers, it was all too familiar. But now, standing before it, she felt something new, something that wasn't just fear, but an almost magnetic pull, an obsession that had been building inside her since they first set foot in this cursed place. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The room seemed to grow colder as she moved toward the mirror. It was the only thing in the room that still held her attention, its dark surface reflecting the faint glow of the candles she had set around the room, their flames flickering with an almost unnatural rhythm. The whispers grew louder, clearer, urging her to touch it. Her breath caught in her throat as she extended her hand. Her fingers brushed against the glass and a jolt ran through her body. It wasn't the coldness of the glass that shocked her, but the sensation of someone on the other side. For a moment she could have sworn that the reflection in the mirror wasn't her own. It was a shadow, a dark figure standing just behind her, watching her every move. But when she whipped around, there was nothing but the empty room. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she tried to dismiss the fear clawing at her insides. But the mirror, the reflection, it wasn't normal. It was as if it were alive, feeding off her unease, drawing her in deeper. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were voices, louder now, clearer. They seemed to call her name, each syllable dripping with malice, as though the very air itself was thick with warning. Sarah. The voice was so close now. She could almost feel the breath on the back of her neck. She spun around again, but this time she saw it, the shadow. It wasn't in the corner of her eye. It was there, standing directly in front of her, its face obscured by the darkness. It wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient, and it was waiting. Her breath hitched as the room seemed to close in on her. She stumbled backward, her pulse racing as the shadow moved closer, its presence growing more oppressive. The temperature dropped, her breath turning to mist in the frigid air. The whispers grew louder, their voices becoming a cacophony of indistinguishable sounds overlapping and echoing from every corner of the room. They weren't just in her mind anymore, they were real. "Leave," Sarah whispered to herself. But the words came out more like a plea than a command. She took a step back, but the shadow followed. Every move she made seemed to bring her closer to it, and with each step the darkness around her seemed to deepen, swallowing the light whole. Her mind was racing. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The house, no, the mirror was alive, and it was watching her. The shadow reached out, its hand, or what could only be described as a hand, stretching toward her, its fingers elongating as it got closer. She could feel the weight of its gaze on her, cold and suffocating. It was as though the air itself was thickening, pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow's presence was overwhelming, its grip on her growing tighter with each passing second. And then, just as she thought she couldn't bear it any longer, the shadow stopped. It hovered in front of her, unmoving, its presence so powerful that it felt as though the entire house had been swallowed by it. And then slowly the shadow spoke. "You're mine now," it whispered, its voice low and guttural, filling the room with a sense of dread unlike anything she had ever known. "You are the last to enter, the final piece to complete the puzzle. You cannot leave, not now, not ever." The words cut through her like a knife tearing into her very soul. Her heart raced as she stumbled backward, eyes locked on the figure before her. But the shadow didn't move. It simply stood there, watching her, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, burning with an ancient hunger. A new voice, different from the shadows, echoed in her mind. A faint whisper, "Sarah, you don't understand. You've already crossed the threshold. Her head snapped to the side, but there was no one else in the room. The voice was coming from the mirror. The glass was no longer just reflecting her, it was alive. The shadows inside it were moving, undulating. Like something was shifting behind the glass. The reflection was changing, warping until it no longer resembled the room she stood in. Instead, it showed something else, something ancient, dark, and cold. A vast empty void where the shadows crawled and the screams of lost souls echoed in the distance. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from it. The mirror had her. It had taken her already, and now it wanted more. The shadow's voice returned, this time filled with a cruel sense of finality. You are part of it now. The house. The mirror. They will never let you go. The glass started to ripple as if something was pressing from the other side. Sarah's mind raced. She had to get out. She had to break free. But no matter how hard she tried to move, it felt as though her body was rooted to the spot. She was trapped. Trapped in the house. Trapped in the mirror. She turned, looking wildly for something, anything, to break the hold the mirror had over her. Her gaze landed on the hammer that had been left beside the fireplace. The tool that could shatter the glass, destroy it. Destroy whatever evil lay behind it. But as she reached out for it, the shadow moved. It surged forward, its form twisting and contorting unnaturally, its presence growing larger and more overpowering. She froze, paralyzed by fear as it reached for her, its cold, dark hand stretching out to claim her. For the briefest moment, Sarah's thoughts were clear. She had no choice. She had to act. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed the hammer and swung it with everything she had. The blow struck the mirror, sending a crack racing through its surface. The room seemed to shudder, the walls groaning as though the house itself were alive, protesting the destruction. The mirror's surface shimmered, rippling like water before the crack widened. But as the glass began to shatter, the shadow let out a deafening roar. The glass burst into thousands of pieces, each fragment glowing with a sickly light, and then silence. The room returned to its eerie stillness, but Sarah knew it wasn't over. Not yet. As the last of the glass fell to the floor, the air shifted. The whispering stopped. The shadow was gone, but the fear, the darkness, the sense that something was still watching her, it lingered. The house remained. And Sarah knew, deep down, that the mirror was only the beginning. The silence in the room was deafening, a thick, suffocating quiet that clung to Sarah like a cold fog. She stood amidst the shattered remains of the mirror, her chest heaving with the frantic breaths of someone who had just escaped the jaws of death. The pieces of glass lay scattered around her, each shard reflecting bits of light in odd angles, almost mocking her sense of victory. For a moment she thought she was free, but deep down she could feel it, a presence, a weight pressing down on her. The air was still, yet it felt as if the house itself was holding its breath. Waiting. Waiting for what? The question echoed in Sarah's mind, but she had no answers. She had broken the mirror, shattered the glass, but the shadow still lingered in her thoughts, in the very walls of the house. Could it truly be gone? Had she destroyed the thing that had tormented her? Her legs trembled as she took a hesitant step forward, the crunch of broken glass beneath her feet breaking the silence. She barely noticed it, her mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. The house was unnaturally cold, the temperature dropping further with each passing second. She could see her breath hanging in the air, visible in the gloom like tendrils of fog. Her gaze fell to the remnants of the mirror. The pieces were small now, scattered in a chaotic pattern, but one shard caught her eye. It was larger than the rest, and it seemed to glow with an unnatural light, as though it had absorbed the very essence of the shadow. She couldn't tear her eyes away from it, despite the growing fear that gnawed at her. The light pulsed, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. A sudden, sharp noise cut through the silence, a low creak from somewhere deeper within the house. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned slowly, expecting to see James, expecting him to come rushing back into the room after hearing the crash, but there was no one. The house was empty. Her pulse quickened. The creaking continued, this time followed by the faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone or something was moving toward her. Her eyes darted around the room, but there was no one. She was alone, or so she thought. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. "James?" she called, her voice shaky, but the word felt hollow in the empty room. No answer. The house seemed to swallow the sound whole. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as the faintest whisper reached her ears, barely audible, like a breath brushing against her skin. It was a voice she knew too well. "Sarah!" She spun around, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The house remained still, too still. She felt her skin prickle, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. It wasn't just the house, the darkness, the broken mirror. It was the feeling of being watched. A sensation she couldn't shake, no matter how hard she tried. Her eyes locked onto the shard of glass again, and for the briefest moment she thought she saw something move in the reflection. A figure, a shadow. Slowly it materialized, its edges blurry and indistinct, but unmistakably there. The shape of a man, tall and imposing, his face obscured in darkness, his eyes burning with a fierce, unnatural light. Sarah gasped, her heart thumping in her chest. It wasn't just a reflection. It was the shadow, the same dark figure that had haunted her every step, every thought. It was as if the very mirror itself had come alive, its reflection now seeping into the room, spreading like ink across a page. "No," she whispered, the words slipping out in disbelief. She took a step back, her legs shaky beneath her, but the figure remained, its eyes never leaving hers. The whispering returned, louder this time, filling her ears with an almost maddening urgency. "Sarah, you thought you could escape?" The voice came from everywhere, filling the room and seeping into her very soul. It was the shadow's voice, cold and taunting. The figure in the glass didn't move, but somehow it seemed to reach out, as though trying to cross the threshold between the reflection and reality. Sarah stumbled backward, her back hitting the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The pulse of the glass shard grew stronger, the light more intense, as if it were calling to her, beckoning her to come closer. She had to get out. She had to run. Her mind raced as she turned to the door, but when she tried to reach for the handle, her hand froze. It was as if the very air around her had thickened, pressing against her, holding her in place. She tugged at the door, desperate, but it wouldn't budge. No, 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 no. The house was alive again. She could feel it, its pulse matching the rhythm of the shadow's presence, pressing in from all sides. It was closing in on her. The walls seemed to shift, warping and twisting, as though the very structure of the house was alive, hungry, waiting to consume her. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped her wrist, pulling her back. She gasped, her body jerking in fear, but when she looked up, there was no one there, only the shadow standing at the doorway. It was in the room now, its form more solid, more real. It was no longer just a reflection. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice low, guttural, and full of malice. "Not while the mirror still lives." Her blood ran cold. She could feel it now, a presence behind her, not just in the mirror, but in the very air, closing in, suffocating her. She knew she had to act. She had to break the cycle. There was only one way. The shadow's hand reached out, a dark tendril of smoke wrapping around her throat, squeezing tighter with every passing second. Her vision blurred as the air grew thick, her body weakening. The house was closing in and she was losing control. She could barely breathe, her chest tightening as the darkness consumed her. But then she remembered. The mirror. The way it had pulled her in. The way it had drawn her closer. If the mirror had power, maybe, just maybe, she could use it against the shadow. She had to break it. Her vision was fading, her strength slipping away, but she forced her eyes to focus on the shard of glass, the same shard that had once pulsed with light. It was her only chance. With all the strength she could muster, Sarah tore her wrist free from the shadow's grip. She staggered toward the shard, her legs weak beneath her, but her resolve stronger than ever. She reached for the shard, her fingers trembling, and held it up, facing the darkness that had consumed her. "Be gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the shadow only laughed. "You think you can destroy me? You are mine." You always were, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She thrust the shard into the air, the light from the glass growing blinding, tearing through the room, shredding the darkness that had once seemed so invincible. For a moment, everything went quiet. The shadow screamed, a sound that ripped through the air, tearing apart the silence. It writhed, twisting in on itself as the light from the shard grew brighter, pulsing with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. And then, in an instant, it was gone. The room was still. The house was silent once more. Sarah collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, the weight lifting from her chest. She had done it. She had broken free. The shadow was gone. But as she looked around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. The mirror was shattered, but the darkness, the fear, it hadn't completely gone. It never truly would. You said? Sarah's breathing slowed, but her pulse still raced as she sat on the floor, surrounded by the jagged remains of the mirror. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that pressed against her ears, suffocating. She looked down at the broken glass, now scattered in a silent sea of sharp shards. It was as if the world itself had held its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen next. Her heart was still thudding in her chest, every muscle in her body trembling, but she knew the danger wasn't over. Not really. The shadow was gone for now, but something about the air in the house felt different, heavier. The shadows, once confined to the mirror, seemed to have stretched into the very fabric of the room, lingering in the corners like something that refused to die. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the broken pieces underfoot as she moved. Her hands were shaking, but she had to keep moving. James. She needed to find James. He had to know what had happened, what had almost happened. He had to understand. She turned, but the hallway beyond seemed to stretch impossibly far, shadows licking at the edges of her vision. James? Her voice came out in a whisper, hoarse, the words seeming foreign on her tongue. She strained to hear anything, a sound, a movement, but there was only the oppressive silence. She took a hesitant step toward the door leading to the rest of the house, then another and then another, until she was moving down the hallway. The walls, once so familiar, now seemed alien, stretching and distorting with every step she took. The shadows played tricks on her eyes, whispering with voices that were just out of reach. Her mind raced. The house had changed. Something in it had awakened. She could feel it. It was as though the very structure of the building had become sentient, responding to her presence, to the disturbance she'd caused by breaking the mirror. The creaking of the floorboards underfoot echoed through the house, sending chills down her spine. Her hand reached out, brushing against the wall to steady herself, but it felt cold to the touch. Unnaturally cold, like the skin of someone who had been dead for years. The hairs on her neck stood on end. There was no logical explanation for what was happening. This was more than just a house, it was a trap, and Sarah had fallen straight into it. The whispers returned, softer now, but far more persistent. They curled around her, wrapping themselves around her mind like a thick, suffocating fog. They spoke in riddles in a language she couldn't understand. The deeper she moved into the house, the clearer it became the house was alive. The mirror had been the heart of it, the conduit for whatever dark force had taken root here, but now that the mirror was destroyed, something else had taken its place. Sarah. The whisper came again, but this time it was different. It wasn't from behind her or from the walls, but from inside her head. The voice was unmistakable, James's voice. Her breath caught in her throat. She had to find him. The fear that had started to gnaw at her turned into something more desperate, more primal. She moved faster now, her feet pounding against the old wooden floor, each step carrying her deeper into the house's dark heart. She reached the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath her weight, but she didn't hesitate. Her mind screamed at her to go faster, to find him. But a voice in the back of her mind, one that she didn't want to listen to, told her that every step she took only brought her closer to something far worse than she could imagine. The hallway above her was dark, the shadows thick and oppressive, and as she reached the top of the stairs, she felt a sudden shift in the air. The temperature dropped even further, and a coldness wrapped around her like a tightening vice. She could feel something lurking just beyond the edge of her vision, a presence that was waiting, watching, but not moving. Yet. The door to the master bedroom creaked open of its own accord as Sarah approached. She didn't know why she entered. She didn't know why she had to, but it felt like a compulsion, a need she couldn't explain. The door swung wide with an unnatural ease, revealing a room that was untouched, eerily pristine. No dust, no signs of age. It looked as though it had been preserved in time. And there, standing by the window, was James. James! Sarah's voice broke the silence, loud and desperate, but there was no response. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her feet felt like lead. She took a step forward, then another, until she was standing right behind him. He was motionless, staring out the window, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight that spilled through the glass. James. She reached out to touch his shoulder, but as her hand made contact, he flinched. His body jerked like someone waking from a nightmare. His head turned slowly, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. But then it was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Sarah. His voice was slow, broken as if he hadn't spoken in days. It's too late. Her heart clenched in her chest. What do you mean? We're still alive. We can still get out of here. James shook his head, his face pale, his eyes distant. No, Sarah, you don't understand. The mirror, it's not just the glass. It's the house. It's the whole place. It's feeding on us. We can't leave. Sarah stepped back, her breath quickening as panic surged through her. What do you mean? I destroyed the mirror. It's gone. The shadow, the thing in the mirror, it's gone. But James only smiled, a slow, sad smile. It's not gone. It was never just the mirror. You can't destroy it. You can't escape it. It's in us now. We're part of it. His words struck Sarah like a blow, the realization slowly dawning on her. She had thought the mirror was the source of all this. She had believed that breaking it would end everything. But James was right. The mirror had merely been the gateway. The house itself, the dark presence that had been lurking just beneath the surface, was the true source of their torment. James stepped away from the window, his movements stiff and unnatural. It's too late for both of us. The house won't let us go, not now. Not ever. Sarah's head spun, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows thickening around them. She tried to take a step back, but the room seemed to shift, the floor beneath her feet trembling as if the house was alive, breathing, ready to swallow them whole. Suddenly, the room grew darker. The shadows, once merely creeping along the edges of the room, now moved like living things crawling along the walls, twisting and warping as they filled every corner. Sarah's pulse raced. The house was feeding on them just as James had said. It had already begun to take them in, to claim them as part of its own. The walls groaned as if the house itself was waking up, stretching, preparing to consume them. James! Sarah screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the growing darkness, the shadows that reached out for her, pulling her toward the center of the room. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the darkness ceased. The house went silent again. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she looked around, but she couldn't see James anymore. Everything was quiet, too quiet, and then she heard it. A soft, faint whisper, coming from somewhere deep inside the house, inside her mind. You are not alone. The whisper echoed through her, crawling under her skin, and Sarah realized, too late, that she had never been alone. The house had always been with her. It had always been watching, and now it was hungry. You said? The silence in the room was oppressive, thick like a physical force pressing in from all sides. Sarah stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. She could feel the weight of the shadows closing in around her, their cold tendrils creeping across the floor, up the walls and coiling around her heart. The house was breathing again, exhaling its ancient, suffocating presence, and she was trapped inside it, caught in its dark, hungry grip. She tried to move, but the air was too heavy. Her feet felt like they were sinking into the floor, as though the very house were trying to hold her in place. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her legs unsteady beneath her. The whispering returned, swirling around her, growing louder with each passing second. It was everywhere now, inside her head, in the walls, in the very air she breathed. The voices were no longer just faint murmurs. They were a cacophony of whispers, screeching, calling her name, filling her mind with terrifying promises. Sarah, come closer. Her heart skipped a beat. The voice was James's. It sounded distant, distorted, as if he were calling from far away, yet somehow impossibly close. No, she whispered to herself, shaking her head. It's not real. It can't be. But deep down she knew the truth. It wasn't James calling her. It was something else. The house was alive, and it was trying to pull her in, to claim her as its own. The walls groaned, a low, mournful sound that vibrated through her bones. She stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was nowhere to go. The door she had entered through was gone, replaced by a wall of shifting shadows swirling like a storm. There was no escape. The whispering continued, becoming more insistent. Sarah, we are waiting. You cannot escape. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to wake up, to find herself back in the real world, back where things made sense. But when she opened them again, the shadows were still there, thicker, darker, and now something else was emerging from them. Something worse. A figure tall and shrouded in darkness, its shape indistinct, but its presence unmistakable. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The figure stepped forward, moving unnaturally, its limbs jerking and twisting as it came closer. It was no longer just a shadow. It was real, tangible, its form solidifying with each step. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated arms and fingers that seemed to stretch and bend in ways that defied nature. Its face was obscured by a mask of darkness, but Sarah could feel its eyes on her, cold, empty, and full of malice. "You were always meant to be here," the figure rasped, its voice like the scrape of metal against stone. "The house has chosen you. You are the final piece." Sarah backed away, her feet stumbling over the broken pieces of glass, the remnants of the mirror that had once contained this nightmare. She didn't know what the figure meant, the final piece, but the way it moved toward her. Its shadow swallowing the light made her feel like she was drowning. Her mind raced, the edges of her thoughts blurring together as the whispers grew louder, more urgent. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. She had to do something. She had to escape. But the figure was too close now. She could see the twisted contours of its face, its hollow eyes staring down at her with unblinking intensity. It was drawing nearer, its presence so suffocating that she could barely breathe. "You cannot leave," the figure hissed, its voice now a low growl. "The house is alive, Sarah. It has chosen you. You belong to it now." Her pulse raced as panic surged within her. There had to be a way out. There had to be. She had broken the mirror, had destroyed the source of the darkness. But now it seemed as though the entire house had become a prison, its walls closing in, its floors giving way beneath her. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward her, their forms rippling like liquid smoke eager to consume her. She looked around, her eyes darting frantically as she searched for an escape, but the house had transformed. What had once been a home was now something else entirely. A labyrinth of darkness and whispers, a maze designed to trap her. The air was thick with an oppressive energy that made her feel lightheaded, dizzy. And then she saw it. A door barely visible in the corner of her eye. It was half hidden behind a shadow, but it was there, just barely. She didn't know if it was real or if her mind was playing tricks on her. But she had no choice. She had to try. She turned, sprinting toward the door with all the strength she had left, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadows seemed to reach out, clawing at her, but she ignored them, pushing forward with everything she had. She was almost there. Almost, but just as her hand grasped the door handle, a cold hand shot out from the darkness and gripped her wrist. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, but it was swallowed by the thick, suffocating silence of the house. The figure was behind her now, its breath cold and rancid against her neck. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice a mocking, guttural rasp. "The house has claimed you." Her heart raced, but she couldn't move. The grip on her wrist was too strong, its fingers digging into her skin, sending a sharp pain through her arm. She felt herself being pulled back, dragged away from the door and back into the center of the room where the shadows were waiting. "No," she screamed again, her voice desperate, but the figure didn't let go. She fought against it, her body trembling with exhaustion, but it was no use. The shadows closed in around her, suffocating her in their grip, and her vision blurred as the darkness swallowed her whole. And then, everything went quiet. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the room. She was standing in a place that felt wrong. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't light either. It was as though she had been transported to some in-between place, neither here nor there. The air felt thick, the ground beneath her feet shifting like soft, wet earth. The shadows that had once been her tormentors were now distant, far away but still present, lingering on the edges of her vision. She was alone, or so she thought. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but the longer she stood there, the more she felt the weight of something watching her, something ancient, something beyond her understanding. The whispering began again. Not from the house this time, but from everywhere, from the very air itself. It wasn't the voice of the figure anymore. It was different. It was familiar, too familiar. "Sarah," the voice called softly, like a lover's whisper, like someone who had known her for a lifetime. "You have made it. You have crossed over." The ground beneath her feet shifted again, the earth beginning to crack and break apart as though it were alive. Sarah took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling, but it was swallowed by the shifting silence. The voice came again, this time louder, clearer, and unmistakably close. "You cannot run anymore. You have entered the true house. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a silhouette she immediately recognized. James, but this wasn't James. Not anymore. His eyes were dark, black pools of nothing, and his smile was twisted. Something more sinister than anything she had seen before. His body was no longer his. He was like a puppet, a marionette pulled by invisible strings. His movements jerky and unnatural. "You were always meant to be here," the thing in James's form said, its voice a mocking echo of his own. "You are the final piece of the puzzle. Welcome to the true house, Sarah." Sarah stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the twisted reflection of James. His face, once so familiar, was now contorted into something dark and foreign. The shadows had transformed him, had claimed him, and now they were pulling him further into their grasp. Her mind raced, but there was no escape. The ground beneath her feet shifted again and the air grew thick, as though the very fabric of the world was warping around her. "You are the final piece of the puzzle," James's distorted voice echoed through her thoughts, his smile widening with every syllable, a grotesque mockery of the person he once was. "You think you can escape? No, Sarah, you belong here. This is where you've always belonged." The words reverberated in her mind, but they were just echoes, fading into the distance as the shadows closed in tighter, suffocating her. Sarah's throat constricted as panic surged through her, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The air around her was growing heavier, thicker, and she felt as though she were sinking, her feet sinking into the very earth beneath her. Her hands trembled as they clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. But she refused to let the terror overwhelm her. She had to fight. She had to break free. Taking a deep breath, Sarah forced herself to take a step back. Then another. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. The shadows were closing in, their whispers rising in volume, their cold fingers brushing against her skin. The distorted figure of James took a slow step toward her, his movements jerky, unnatural, as though something was controlling him, pulling his strings. His smile never wavered, that sickening grin stretching wider. "James," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "This isn't you. You're still in there, I know you are. Fight it." But the thing that wore James's face didn't respond. It simply continued to move toward her, its footsteps slow and deliberate, each one sending a tremor through the air, vibrating deep into her bones. "You can't stop it." The figure of James spoke again, his voice cold and hollow. But now there was something more in his words, something darker. "It's already too late. The house owns us. The house owns you. We are part of it now. You will never leave." The air around her felt like it was closing in, like the very walls of this place were breathing in and out, pulling her deeper into the darkness. But Sarah wasn't listening to his words anymore. She didn't care about what it was telling her. She knew it was a lie. Sarah didn't care about the shadow that clung to the air or the way the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and move as though it were alive. She knew deep down that she had already lost too much. She had lost James, and now she was standing on the edge of a reality that she could barely comprehend. And yet, despite the overwhelming fear that threatened to consume her, she felt a spark, small but growing deep within her, a flicker of something stronger than the fear that had haunted her for so long. She would not let it win. She had to fight. "James," she cried out, her voice rising above the whispering shadows. "You're not gone. I won't let you be gone." The distorted version of James hesitated for a moment, its face flickering as though it were struggling, like it was fighting against some invisible force. For a split second, Sarah saw it, the faintest hint of recognition in his eyes, a brief moment where he was truly there, trapped within the darkness. But before she could take a step toward him, the shadow surged forward, pulling him back, reclaiming him. "No," she whispered, her breath hitching. But she didn't stop. She pushed forward, ignoring the way the shadows wrapped themselves around her, tugging at her clothes and hair. With every step she took, the house seemed to groan in protest, the walls rattling, the floor trembling beneath her. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what she was looking for. But she couldn't stand still, not now. Not with James so close. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as though the very walls were closing in, urging her to stop, to give in. But she pushed through, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stumbled forward. There was a door ahead of her. It wasn't much, a wooden door, half hidden in the shadows, but it was there. and it was her only chance. She reached out, her hand trembling, and grasped the cold handle. The moment she touched it, the air around her seemed to still. The house seemed to hold its breath, and for a heartbeat, everything was quiet. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the door open. Beyond the door, the world had shifted again. What had once been the hallway, dark and twisted, was now replaced by a vast, endless void. A sea of shadows that stretched into infinity. The air was thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break, and in the distance she saw it. A figure, standing in the center of the void, waiting. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her as she stepped into the void, the door slamming shut behind her. There was no going back now. No more doors. No more escape. The figure that waited in the distance was no longer James, but something far worse. Its shape was human, but its face was a blur of darkness, its eyes burning with a malevolent, inhuman light. It stood still as if it had been waiting for her, and as she moved closer, the air seemed to pulse with energy, each step taking her deeper into its grip. "You are here," the figure spoke, its voice distorted, as if coming from all directions at once. "You've always been here. The house has been waiting for you. It called you home." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She refused to listen. "I won't be your prisoner," she whispered, more to herself than to the figure. "I won't be anyone's prisoner." The figure's laugh echoed through the void, a sound that reverberated deep within her bones, shaking her to her core. "You think you have a choice? You were always meant to be here, Sarah. The house chose you, and now you will be part of it. Forever." As the figure spoke, the shadows around her began to shift, swirling in a chaotic dance, moving with a life of their own. They reached out toward her, their long, tendril-like forms creeping closer, dragging themselves across the floor like serpents hunting their prey. But Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the figure, her body trembling with fear, but with something else too. A fierce, burning defiance. "I will not become part of you," she said, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her heart. "You can't have me. I won't let you." The figure moved then, its shape shifting as it glided toward her, its presence growing larger with every step, the shadows swirling around it like a storm. It was nearly upon her when Sarah did the only thing she could think to do. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the shard of glass, the last remnant of the mirror. It glowed faintly in her hand, a shard of light in the darkness. She raised it above her head, the sharp edge catching the pale light from the figure's eyes. "You're wrong," she whispered. "I'm not yours to claim." With all the strength she could muster, she threw the shard of glass toward the figure, sending it spinning through the air. The glass glinted like a blade, cutting through the shadows. And when it struck the figure, there was an explosion of light so bright, so blinding that for a moment Sarah thought she had gone blind. But when the light cleared, the figure was gone. The shadows faded. The void was still. For a moment Sarah stood there panting, her heart still racing. The air around her had cleared, and the weight of the house's presence seemed to have lifted. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, but eventually the silence grew oppressive again. The house was gone. The shadows were gone. And yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still waiting. Something that hadn't been destroyed. Something that would never truly let her go. The whispers had stopped, but in the distance, faint as a breath, she could hear it again. Her name. "You said..." Sarah stood in the eerie silence, her pulse still pounding in her ears. She was breathing hard, the air thick with a strange stillness that made her feel like she had stepped out of reality itself. For a moment, she thought the battle was over. The figure had vanished, the shadows had receded, and the oppressive weight of the house seemed to have lifted, leaving only the quiet. But the quiet was unsettling. It was too much like the calm before a storm. Her eyes scanned the void around her. The once terrifying darkness had faded into a kind of dull gray mist, but there was something else now, something even more terrifying than the endless shadows. In the distance, she saw it, a faint shape, distant and flickering like the flicker of a dying flame. It was small at first, but it grew larger with every second, until she could no longer deny it. Someone was coming. No, not someone, something. The shape was humanoid, but it moved in jerky, unnatural motions, the way a broken doll would when dragged across the floor. Each step it took seemed to make the very air shudder, as though the world itself was recoiling from its presence. The figure was tall, its body outlined in shadow, its face obscured by a dark veil of smoke. But the longer Sarah stared at it, the clearer its form became. Her throat tightened, her body frozen as the figure grew closer, slowly advancing toward her with deliberate, horrifying purpose. It was still a distance away, but every step it took felt like a countdown, like she had moments, maybe seconds, before it would reach her. The whispers returned, louder this time, but they were no longer distant or fragmented. They were all around her now, filling her mind, curling into her thoughts, repeating her name like a chant growing in urgency. Sarah, Sarah. She turned her head, frantic, searching for any sign of escape, but the fog had enveloped everything. There was nowhere to run, no exit. The house, the thing that had once been a house, had grown even more oppressive, more consuming. She felt its cold touch creeping into her bones, pulling at her very essence. The figure was getting closer now, its presence becoming stronger, more intense, until Sarah could feel the darkness in the air pressing against her, pushing her down. Her heart raced, the adrenaline surging through her veins, but there was nowhere to go, no way out. The air felt heavier now, each breath harder to take. Sarah. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was a command, a force that cut through the fog, like the blade of a knife slicing into her mind. It was familiar, so familiar and yet so wrong. It was James, or what had once been James. The voice that called to her now was cold, guttural, unnatural. She had heard this voice before, but it had never sounded like this. It had never been so empty, so void of any warmth. She wanted to scream, to shout his name, but the sound seemed to die in her throat, as though her voice were caught in the grip of something larger, something far more dangerous. The figure stopped moving. For a moment, Sarah thought she had imagined it, but then the figure tilted its head, the movement jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on fraying strings. "Why do you fight?" it asked, its voice sharp and broken like the shattering of glass. "You were always meant to join us. The house chose you, Sarah." The word house reverberated in her mind, echoing with the power of something ancient. She could feel it now, that suffocating pull, as though the house, this place, was alive. It was feeding on her, drawing her in, and the figure before her, this mockery of James, was its servant. "Its agent." "No," Sarah gasped, her voice raw. "You're lying." "This is a lie. You are not James. You are mine." The figure interrupted, its voice rising, a harsh screech of anger that echoed through the void. Its eyes, black as ink, bore into her like two holes carved into the fabric of reality. "You belong to me, Sarah, to us. The house was made for you. You cannot fight it. You cannot escape." The figure's arms stretched forward, long and gnarled, the skin stretched tight over its bones. The darkness swirling around it grew, expanding like smoke, until it seemed to fill the entire space. The walls, once distant and empty, now seemed to pulse with life, their surfaces rippling, alive with an energy Sarah couldn't comprehend. In the distance, she saw the faintest glimmer. A door, just like the one she had entered through, but this one was different. This one was not an escape. It was a path leading deeper into the heart of the house, into the heart of the darkness. The figure took another step forward, its footfalls heavy and deliberate, each one seeming to shake the very foundation of the void. It was so close now. She could feel its breath on her face, cold and fetid, like death itself had come to claim her. "I won't let you have me," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to the figure, but the words felt hollow, empty. Her fear was swallowing her whole. She could feel it. This place was winning. The house was winning. And then, in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just a house. It was a prison. The house had never been a place. It had always been a thing. A creature that fed on those it trapped, pulling them in, feeding off their fear and their despair until they were nothing but part of the dark, twisted entity that had made the house its home. It had fed on her fear long enough. With a burst of strength, Sarah lunged forward, shoving through the thick, choking fog that seemed to be smothering her. Her feet moved as if in slow motion, the shadows closing in, but she refused to stop. She had felt the darkness trying to take her, had taken her, but she wasn't done yet. She couldn't be. The door was still there, still ahead of her, though it seemed to grow more distant with every step she took. It was as though the house itself was fighting her now, the walls shifting, the ground beneath her feet buckling and trembling with each step. "No," she screamed, her voice raw and desperate. She wasn't going to let this house claim her. She wasn't going to be consumed. Not like this. The door was closer now, just a few more steps. But then, as she reached out to grasp the handle, something grabbed her wrist, yanking her back with a force that made her gasp. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. To see the figure, James, standing behind her, his face contorted into a grotesque grin, his black eyes burning with malevolent fire. "You can't leave," it hissed, its voice now sharp and jagged, like nails scraping on metal. "You belong here. You will always belong here." Sarah struggled against the grip, but it was too strong. Her entire body was shaking, her limbs weak from exhaustion. She could feel the shadows pulling at her, dragging her closer to the dark center of the house. The door, her only chance at freedom, seemed to shrink before her eyes, its edges fading into the fog, and then the figure spoke again. "But there's one thing you didn't understand. Sarah." The figure stepped closer, its face now inches from hers. The smell of decay and rot filled the air, but Sarah didn't flinch. She couldn't. "Not now. You were never meant to leave," it said, its voice now impossibly close, the words dripping with malice. "You were always meant to join us." The house seemed to pulse with a terrible energy, and for a moment everything went still. Time stopped. Sarah's body trembled, her mind racing, but one thing became clear. There was no escaping. The house was her prison now, and it was hungry. And soon it would consume her, just as it had consumed so many others before her. As the figure reached for her, she closed her eyes, ready to face the darkness. But in the distance, she could still hear her name being called. A faint whisper just out of reach, and then she knew. She wasn't done yet. The figure's grip on Sarah tightened, pulling her back into the suffocating darkness, but her heart, pounding in her chest, surged with a new determination. She couldn't let this thing, this abomination, drag her back into its depths. There had to be another way, a way to fight it, to escape, to stop this nightmare from consuming her. The figure loomed over her, its breath cold and rancid, sending a shiver down her spine as it whispered in her ear, its voice a raspy hiss. "You were never meant to leave. The house has chosen you, Sarah. You belong to us." The words echoed through her mind, reverberating like a warning bell that sounded too distant, too final. But as the figure's grip tightened, her own resolve solidified. This wasn't James. No matter how much it looked like him, it wasn't him. This was the house, the thing that had controlled him, twisted him into this creature standing before her. The house, she realized, wasn't just a place. It was alive. It had been feeding on her fears, on her doubts, on everything she had left of herself. The darkness that surrounded her wasn't just the absence of light. It was the house itself, a sentient, suffocating entity, eager to claim her soul. But it couldn't. Not yet. The shadows swirled around her, wrapping themselves around her legs, pulling her down. But Sarah fought back with all the strength she could muster. She kicked, trying to break free of their grasp, her body shaking with exhaustion. But something else, a surge of desperation, was pushing her forward. She wasn't going to let it win. She wasn't going to become just another lost soul, another forgotten prisoner in the house's endless nightmare. With a surge of energy, she twisted her arm out of the figure's grip, her wrist raw from the pressure. She spun around, barely able to see through the thick fog that surrounded her, but there, just ahead of her, was the faintest glow, a light at the end of a long tunnel. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough. That's it, she thought, her mind focusing on the light. It had to be the way out. She had to get to it, no matter the cost. The figure, sensing her attempt to escape, hissed louder, its voice growing more shrill, filled with rage. "You can't escape!" The shadows roared, the walls of the house trembling as though they were alive, constricting around her. The temperature dropped sharply, and a sense of suffocating dread gripped her chest, but Sarah pushed through it. She couldn't stop. She wouldn't. The glow grew brighter as she neared it, illuminating the fog around her, and for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't far now. Then, without warning, a loud crack filled the air as if the house itself were breaking apart. The ground beneath her feet trembled, throwing her off balance. She stumbled, her body crashing to the cold floor, her head spinning. The force of the tremor felt as though the entire house was alive, thrashing, unwilling to let her go. She barely had time to react before she saw it. A dark tendril shot from the ground, wrapping around her ankle, pulling her back. The shadows twisted around her, more aggressive now, as if they knew they were losing control. No, Not again, she screamed, her voice raw, but the tendrils only grew tighter, the air growing heavier with each passing second. She fought, kicking and pulling, but the darkness held firm, dragging her toward the center of the void. The light in front of her dimmed, flickering as the darkness around her expanded. She felt herself being sucked deeper into the maw of the house, into its heart. But just as she felt the pull becoming too strong, the flickering light surged forward, brighter than before, and with it came a strange warmth. It was like a beacon, cutting through the suffocating fog. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. But she knew. This was it. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah reached forward, her hands shaking as she touched the source of the light, a shard of glass, glowing with an unnatural radiance embedded into the floor like an anchor. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the ground beneath her feet shuddered again. But this time it wasn't a tremor of fear, it was a tremor of release. The shadows recoiled. The figure behind her screamed, a high-pitched wail that filled the air with such force that it sent Sarah's mind spinning. "You think you can defy me?" It screeched, but its voice was fading, growing weaker with each passing second. "You think you can escape this place?" But Sarah didn't listen. She gripped the shard of glass tighter, the light around her intensifying until it was blinding, illuminating the entire space. And then, in a single, desperate motion, she yanked the shard free from the floor. The moment it came loose, the house screamed. The very walls cracked and groaned, the air tearing apart with a deafening roar. The shadows writhed, and the figure behind her staggered back as if repelled by the light. Sarah stumbled, her head spinning, her body weak, but she could feel it. The house, the dark presence that had held her prisoner, was unraveling. It was losing its grip on her. She ran toward the light, her feet barely touching the ground, the shadows pulling at her, but she kept going. The light was her way out. It had to be. The figure was behind her, its angry shrieks echoing through the void. But Sarah didn't stop. The light grew brighter and brighter until it became a blinding, searing radiance that enveloped her, pushing the darkness back, pushing everything back. And then, just as the figure lunged forward to claim her, everything stopped. There was silence. Absolute silence. Sarah opened her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she saw daylight. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, but it was real. She was outside. The air was fresh, cool against her skin, and the weight of the house, the suffocating grip it had on her, was gone. She blinked, disoriented, as she looked around, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The house, the void, the figure, all of it was gone. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something lingering just beyond her reach. The whispers had stopped, but the feeling of being hunted lingered. She could feel it in her bones. The house wasn't gone. Not truly. It was still out there, waiting. She turned away from where the house had once stood, now reduced to nothing but the faintest outline in the distance. She should have felt relief, but instead a cold shiver ran down her spine. The house wasn't finished with her. It wasn't done, but for now at least she was free, and that was enough, or so she thought. But the whispers would follow her. They always did, and no matter how far she ran, she knew the house was always one step behind. The darkness never truly let go. It never truly stopped waiting for her to return. For now, though, Sarah was free. But freedom was fleeting in the world of shadows. You said... Sarah's breath came in jagged gasps as she stumbled through the dense woods, the cold air biting at her skin. Her legs burned from the effort, her heart still racing as she pushed herself forward. Each step a desperate attempt to escape the nightmare that had haunted her for so long. She didn't know how far she'd run, didn't know where she was going, but she didn't care. As long as she could keep moving, keep running, she felt as though she might survive. But deep down, something told her that it wasn't over. The feeling of being watched lingered, crawling under her skin like an infection that refused to heal. The whispering had stopped, but its absence left an even deeper dread in its place, a sense that something was waiting for her to slip, to falter, to look back. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the house, the dark figure that had once worn James's face, standing just behind her, watching, waiting. But there was nothing. Only the dark, gnarled trees of the forest stretching out in every direction, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the sky. For a moment it seemed like she might be free, truly free, but the nagging doubt remained. The house was still there, Somewhere. It had to be. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow, the chill of the air contrasting sharply with the heat still coursing through her veins. She needed to rest, to stop for a moment and gather her thoughts, but the fear, that feeling, wouldn't let her. It was as if the earth itself had become an extension of the house, its dark tendrils reaching out, coiling around her, pulling her deeper into its web. She was trapped, no matter how far she ran. Her mind flicked back to the moment when she had pulled the shard of glass free from the floor, when the light had exploded around her, when the house had screamed in protest. She had thought that was it, the end of the nightmare. But now, as she walked deeper into the woods, she couldn't shake the sense that the house was still there, lingering just behind the edges of her mind. It hadn't let her go. It was simply waiting for her to come back. She stopped, leaning against a tree, gasping for breath, the world around her spinning. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, but the overwhelming sense of dread only grew. She could feel the earth beneath her trembling, like a heartbeat pulsing through the ground. The shadows were still there, just out of reach, curling at the edges of her vision. The air felt wrong, too thick, too heavy. She opened her eyes, her heart racing again, and the feeling intensified. There was something in the woods with her. At first she thought it was her imagination, the fatigue from the run, the adrenaline wearing off, playing tricks on her mind. But then she heard it, the faintest rustle in the underbrush, the snap of a twig. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone or something was moving through the trees just beyond her sight. She turned sharply, her muscles tensing, but the woods were empty. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper now, darker than they had been before, but there was nothing. No movement. No sign of anyone. Her mind raced as she forced herself to take slow, deliberate steps forward. The woods seemed to close in around her, the trees growing tighter, more oppressive, as though they were squeezing the life out of her. She wanted to turn back, to find a way to make sure she wasn't being followed. But she couldn't. The house, the thing, was still waiting, and the further she ran, the more she realized that she had no way of escaping it. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, more suffocating, and Sarah's thoughts became a blur of panic. She could hear footsteps now, unmistakable, moving in sync with hers. They were getting closer. She wasn't alone. The woods had turned into a labyrinth, each path leading her deeper into its grip, its roots stretching beneath the earth, pulling her back toward the house. A sharp crack of a branch broke the silence, and Sarah whipped around, her breath shallow, her body on the verge of collapse. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure. It was James, or rather what had been James. The figure was almost unrecognizable now, its body twisted and misshapen, the darkness crawling over its skin like an invasive force. Its eyes, black as pitch, burned with a malevolent light, and it smiled, but the smile was empty, devoid of any humanity. Sarah, the figure rasped, its voice hollow and broken. "You can never escape." Her heart stopped. The words sank deep into her, a cold weight settling in her chest. She wanted to run, to scream, but the figure's presence held her in place. The air grew colder still, the very earth beneath her feet seeming to turn against her, making her feel like she was sinking into it. "You were always meant to be a part of it," the figure continued, its voice a twisted parody of what it had once been. "The house is part of you, Sarah. You belong here. There's no escape from what you've become." The words sent a surge of fear through her, but then something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let it win. She wasn't going to let it claim her, not again. "No," she shouted, her voice shaking with defiance. "I'm not yours. I'll never be yours." The figure reached toward her, its long fingers stretched wide, its smile widening. But Sarah didn't wait. She turned and bolted, her legs burning as she pushed herself harder, faster. She didn't care where she was going. She didn't care about the pain. She only cared about getting away, getting as far away from the figure, from the house, from the darkness as she could. The woods blurred around her as she ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure's voice echoed behind her, louder now, more insistent, like it was trying to tear through her mind. "You can't escape. You can't run from what you are." The ground beneath her feet gave way suddenly, and she stumbled, falling to the ground, her body hitting the cold, damp earth with a sickening thud. Her head spun, but before she could gather herself, she heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps growing louder, faster. The figure was closing in. She scrambled to her feet, her hands scraping against the rough bark of the trees as she pushed herself upright. Her chest burned with every breath, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her eyes darted around looking for anything that could give her an edge, a way out. And then she saw it, a clearing. The trees parted just ahead, and through the gap she could see a faint flicker of light. It was distant, but it was enough. Without hesitation, Sarah ran toward the clearing, her legs trembling, her mind racing with fear and determination. The air around her seemed to grow colder, the darkness pressing in from all sides, but she kept her eyes fixed on the light ahead. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't, but the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. She was almost there, almost free. And then, just as she reached the clearing, the earth beneath her feet buckled. The ground gave way and Sarah found herself falling through the earth, into the darkness below. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the faint light, still flickering in the distance. A light that, no matter how hard she tried to reach it, was always just beyond her grasp. And the last thing she heard before the darkness swallowed her whole was the voice, James's voice, calling her name, and then silence. "You said." When Sarah opened her eyes again, the world felt different. She was no longer in the forest. She wasn't even sure where she was anymore. The ground beneath her was soft, almost like sand, but it wasn't sand. It was something darker, something that didn't belong in the real world. Her body felt heavy, and her head spun as she tried to sit up, her limbs stiff and aching. For a moment she could barely remember where she had been or how she had gotten here. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog from her mind. But when she looked around, nothing made sense. The landscape was wrong. The air was thick with a heavy, acrid smell like burnt wood and wet earth. But there was no sign of life. No birds, no animals, nothing that should have been in a forest. The trees were twisted, their trunks gnarled and blackened, their leaves long gone. The sky above was dark, tinged with an unnatural purple hue, like twilight had stretched far beyond its time. Where was she? What was this place? As she pushed herself to her feet, the ground trembled beneath her, and her heart skipped a beat. The sound of something moving, something large, echoed through the air. It wasn't a distant sound either. It was close. Too close. And it filled the space around her like a menacing shadow, a presence she could feel pressing in from all sides. She turned in every direction, her pulse quickening, her breath shallow. Nothing. The sound was gone. But then she heard it again. This time louder, a heavy rhythmic thud, 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 thud. It was as if something was walking or stomping closer to her with every passing second. She spun around, her heart in her throat, but all she could see was the twisted, dead forest stretching out endlessly before her, the pale sky looming overhead. The sensation of being watched crawled up her spine, and she realized with a sickening chill that the very air was alive with something she couldn't understand. The trees themselves seemed to shift, their branches moving in unnatural ways, bending and creaking as if reaching toward her, their shadows long and jagged. Sarah's breath came faster now. The ground beneath her seemed to shift with every step she took, the soft earth turning into something more solid, more real. Her eyes darted nervously as she looked for any sign of escape, but there was no door, no path leading her out. The clearing had vanished, replaced by the dark, oppressive expanse of this place. The house, the thing, had found her again. She had thought she had escaped, but it had pulled her right back into its twisted grip. She backed away slowly, her mind racing, trying to think of anything she could do to fight it. The terror clawing at her insides made her feel weak, but she refused to give in. She wasn't going to become part of this nightmare. She wouldn't. The thudding grew louder, more pronounced, until it felt like the ground itself was shaking. And then from behind a particularly twisted tree it appeared. It was a creature, but not like anything she had ever seen. It was towering, easily twice her height, its body covered in jagged black scales that glistened like wet stone. Its eyes were glowing, bright red like burning embers, and its mouth was full of teeth. Teeth so sharp and jagged that they seemed to glow in the dim light. Its body was enormous, towering above her like some ancient predator that had slumbered for centuries, and now with the house's influence it had come to collect its prize. The thing stepped forward, its heavy feet sinking into the ground with each step, sending tremors through the air. It moved with purpose, its gaze fixed on her, and she could feel the weight of its stare deep inside her chest. Her legs shook, but she refused to back down. She was not going to run. She would not be hunted. "You can't escape," the thing rasped, its voice a low growl that reverberated through the air, like the sound of rocks grinding together. "The house wants you. The house needs you." The words hit her like a physical blow and she staggered back, her mind spinning. The house, it wasn't just some place. It was alive. It wanted her. She had been chosen, trapped in its web, a pawn in its dark game. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "I won't be part of you." But the creature only laughed, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't a laugh of joy or amusement. It was the laugh of something ancient, something that had lived for eons and had seen countless souls like hers fall into its grasp. And now, it was coming for her. The ground beneath her feet trembled again and the creature lurched forward, its massive hands reaching for her, its claws gleaming in the pale light. Fear surged through her, but she refused to freeze. She couldn't. She would fight. She had to fight. Sarah ran. The creature's hands slammed into the ground behind her, the force of its strike sending the earth shuddering beneath her. The trees around her groaned, bending under the weight of the creature's presence. She didn't dare look back. She could hear its footsteps now, each one crashing through the forest with terrifying speed. The shadows seemed to reach for her, trying to drag her back into the dark, but she pushed forward, every step a battle. There has to be a way out. Her mind raced as she glanced wildly around, searching for any sign of escape. Her eyes darted to the twisted trees, the dark, oppressive sky. The creature's footsteps were growing louder. She couldn't outrun it, not like this. Her legs were already giving out, her body exhausted from everything she had already been through. Then she saw it. A faint glimmer in the distance, a light. It was small, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there and it was real. It was the same kind of light she had seen before, when she had pulled the shard from the ground, when the house had screamed in protest. The light had always been her escape, her path out of the nightmare. But now, as she focused on it, she could feel the weight of the creature's presence behind her, pushing her forward, urging her to run, to reach the light before it was too late. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The light was her only chance, the only way to get out of this place. Every step she took, the ground seemed to shift beneath her, but she kept moving. Her body was screaming for rest, but she refused to stop. She would not give in to the darkness. The creature's roar echoed through the trees, the sound of its massive body charging after her, but she couldn't focus on it. She couldn't let it consume her. She just had to reach the light. She could do it. She had to. The ground beneath her feet shifted again, and suddenly she was falling. The earth crumbled beneath her, and she plummeted into the darkness, her body twisting as she tried to grasp at anything, but there was nothing. The shadows swallowed her whole. She landed hard, her body hitting the ground with a sickening thud, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her chest ached, her limbs were numb, but through the pain she could hear it, the low growl of the creature echoing above her. It was still there, still hunting her. But something was different now. She wasn't alone, the light. It had followed her. It was closer now, bright and steady. And as Sarah struggled to her feet, the light seemed to reach out to her, a beacon of hope. Her heart raced as she staggered forward, her legs weak, but she refused to stop. The creature was behind her. She could feel its hot breath on her neck. She reached for the light, her hand trembling, but just as she touched it, the ground beneath her feet cracked again, and everything went black. But this time it wasn't just darkness. This time it was something else, something that felt like the end, and then everything stopped. "You said?" The blackness that swallowed Sarah felt like a deep, suffocating void. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't feel anything except the weight of the emptiness pressing in on her from all sides. She wasn't sure how much time had passed. It could have been seconds, minutes, hours. Time had lost its meaning here, in the dark heart of whatever nightmare the house had dragged her into. The only thing that remained was the cold grip of fear that held her in place. But then slowly there was a shift. A faint flicker of light pierced through the darkness, distant at first, like a star on the horizon, then growing stronger, drawing her in, pulling her toward something. Not again, she thought. She had already escaped, hadn't she? The light, the beacon she had clung to before, was always the way out. But now, in this in-between place, she wasn't sure anymore. She couldn't trust the light. Not anymore. The light grew brighter, more insistent, and as it did, she felt something stirring inside her, something deep in her chest, in the pit of her stomach. It was a feeling of dread, of recognition, the same sense of wrongness that had plagued her from the moment she'd entered the house, the moment she'd set foot in its oppressive, suffocating presence, was creeping back. She felt its fingers on the edges of her mind, dragging her back, making her doubt everything she thought she knew. She tried to turn away from the light, but her body wouldn't respond. The pull was too strong, the force of it overwhelming her. It wasn't a choice. She was going toward the light, whether she wanted to or not. And then, just as she was about to reach it, a voice called out to her. It wasn't the low, guttural voice of the creature that had stalked her through the woods. No, this voice was different. It was soft, familiar, yet distant. "James. Sarah," the voice whispered, barely audible over the distant hum of the light. "It's not over. You can't leave." Her heart stopped. Her chest tightened, and the air around her became heavy, thick with the sensation of being trapped, of being caught in something far darker than she had realized. The light, once a promise of escape, now seemed like a lure, drawing her toward something far more dangerous than she could understand. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not him. You can't be." But the voice came again, stronger now, its tone laced with something that made her stomach churn. "You belong here, Sarah. You always have. The house. It's a part of you now. It will never let you go." The words seeped into her mind, wrapping around her like cold chains, and she felt her strength waning. She wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but her body was heavy, unresponsive. The darkness pressed against her chest, and the light now seemed more like a trap, a doorway into something far worse than the creature from the woods. And then the light exploded, filling the space around her, blinding her with its intensity. She tried to shield her eyes, but it was no use. The light surrounded her, suffocating her, pressing in on her from all sides, until she felt herself being pulled, lifted, dragged toward something, her body jolted, her mind reeling, and in the next instant, she was somewhere else. The change was immediate, as if she had crossed some unseen threshold. She found herself standing in an open space, the air fresh and cold, the sky above her clear and dark. The ground beneath her was solid, and she could feel the cool earth beneath her feet. She glanced around in confusion, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in surroundings. It was a graveyard. The tombstones were old and weathered, the names chiseled into their surfaces faded by time. The air felt heavy with the weight of centuries, the silence pressing in, oppressive and still. There was no sound, no wind, no rustle of leaves, only the sound of her own breathing, ragged and shallow. It was as if she had walked into a forgotten place, a place untouched by time, a place that didn't belong in the world she had known. She took a hesitant step forward, her feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. Her eyes scanned the graves, but there was something wrong with them. Some of the stones were cracked, others shattered completely, as if the very ground beneath them had rejected their existence. "Sarah," the voice again. It was James's voice, distant but unmistakable. She whirled around, her breath catching in her throat, but there was no one there. The graveyard was empty, silent save for the faint sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "James?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer, only the cold, mocking silence. But the voice came again, louder this time, closer. "Sarah, you're not free." She spun around again, her heart pounding, and this time she saw it. The figure, standing at the far edge of the graveyard, half hidden in shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form twisted, jagged, like a reflection in a shattered mirror. Its face was hidden in darkness, but its eyes, those burning, empty eyes, stared straight at her, unblinking, piercing through her. No, she thought. Not this again. Not him. But the figure stepped forward, its limbs jerking unnaturally, and she realized with a sickening feeling that it was coming for her. Its movements deliberate, slow, predatory. "You're still part of me, Sarah," the voice rasped. "You've always been part of the house. You can't leave. You will never leave." Her chest tightened. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The house wasn't just a place, it was a part of her, an extension of her fears, her doubts. It had followed her, consumed her until there was nothing left but its hunger. The house wasn't just a house. It was her prison, and she had always been trapped in it. "No," she whispered again, her voice shaking. But this time it wasn't just fear. It was something else, something stronger, She wasn't going to let this creature, this thing, the house, take her again. She had fought it before. She could fight it now. Without thinking, without hesitation, she ran. Her feet pounded against the earth, her legs burning with effort, but she kept moving. She could hear the thing behind her, its steps slow but heavy, its breathing harsh, labored. The graveyard stretched on forever, the tombstones blurring as she ran. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. She had to find a way out. She had to break free. The ground beneath her feet shifted as if the earth itself was trying to hold her in place, but she didn't stop. She kept running, pushing herself until the earth beneath her feet gave way. She fell, the ground crumbling beneath her weight. And before she could scream, she was falling, tumbling into the darkness below. But this time it wasn't just darkness. This time it was the cold embrace of everything. You said the fall was endless. Sarah's body tumbled through the dark, weightless, spiraling deeper into the abyss. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating, pulling at her, wrapping around her like 1,000 hands, each one desperate to drag her deeper. She felt her limbs grow numb, her thoughts scattering like fragments of a broken mirror. And then, just as she thought she might be lost forever, something shifted. A faint light flickered in the distance. It was small at first, like a tiny star in a vast, empty sky. But it grew, expanding, stretching outward as if calling to her. She reached for it instinctively, her body suddenly aware of itself again, her muscles responding, her heart hammering in her chest. The light pulsed with energy, with life, and as she drew closer, Sarah realized it wasn't just light, it was hope. A fragment of something real, something pure. It wasn't the same as the light from before, the one that had lured her in and betrayed her. This one was different. This one didn't feel like a trap. This one felt like freedom. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against its surface, and in that moment she was pulled forward, breaking through the dark void like bursting from the surface of water. The sensation was overwhelming, like being torn apart and put back together in the same instant. And then, everything stopped. The world around her shifted, and she found herself standing on solid ground. The air was fresh, the scent of earth and rain filling her lungs. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the soft light of twilight, and for a moment, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was the forest, the one she had run through, the one she had tried to escape, but it was different now. The trees were no longer twisted, their branches no longer gnarled and dark. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling softly above her. The ground was firm beneath her feet, solid and unyielding. She was standing on the edge of a clearing, the same one she had seen earlier, when she had been running for her life. The light, the one that had pulled her from the abyss, was still there, glowing faintly in the distance. But now it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a beacon, a guide, a point of hope. Sarah stepped forward, her heart still racing, but with a growing sense of peace. She was free. The figure, the creature, was nowhere to be seen. The oppressive feeling of being hunted, of being trapped, was gone. She could still feel the remnants of fear in her chest, the lingering sense that something was wrong, but the weight of it had lifted. She was no longer running. She was standing still, breathing in the cool night air, the soft rustling of leaves around her the only sound. And then, she heard it. A voice, a whisper, Sarah. Her heart stopped. The voice was soft like a breeze in the trees, but it was unmistakable. It was James's voice. James? She whispered, her breath catching in her throat. The name tasted bitter, like a memory she couldn't shake. She turned around, scanning the clearing, but there was no one there.